I'm sure we've all had at least a few encounters with parents who think their decision, made using their own free will, to have children somehow entitles them to special treatment at the expense of others. The Entitled Parents subreddit is a goldmine for such stories, ranging from unbelievable audacity to shocking overreactions, and some of the posts on there that we'll cover later in the video are actually incredibly dark. Let's investigate. If you enjoy internet mysteries and generally disturbing content, feel free to subscribe and turn on notifications for more content like this. If you're interested in supporting the channel, you can become a Ko-fi member or a channel member to gain access to uncut videos and other perks, or you can leave me a tip by clicking the thanks under this video. Thanks to anyone who considers this. The About section of the Entitled Parents subreddit reads, Entitled Parents is a place you can put all those wonderful stories of mums or dads thinking that because they have kids they are entitled to everything. Stories about spoiled children with their entitled parents are also welcome. I would say let's take a look at the good, the bad, and then the ugly, but there really is no good on this subreddit, so let's just go with the funny, the bad, and the ugly. There are countless stories that would certainly be quite infuriating, but ultimately no significant harm was done. Anything from parents letting their children run around screaming in a restaurant, which is one of my biggest pet peeves, to family members expecting people to look after their kids at the drop of a hat. It's honestly baffling to me how some parents put themselves on some kind of pedestal and expect special treatment, as if having children makes them superior and means the world is in debt to them. Of course, having kids is an amazing experience, and as someone who doesn't have any, I do respect parents, good parents that is, for sacrificing their time and energy to give their kids a good life. That said, people have kids because they want to have kids. They're not doing it for anyone else's benefit, so in my opinion, they're not entitled to anything in return, and aren't any better than anyone who decides not to have children. If you have kids, those kids are your responsibility. There's no harm in asking someone to babysit every now and again, or if you're pregnant, asking an able-bodied 30-year-old for their seat on the bus. Those are perfectly reasonable requests, but expecting someone to cancel their plans to babysit, or to give up their reserved seat on a plane because you decided not to book seats next to your children are not reasonable requests, and you can't get mad at someone for saying no. Sometimes you can tell the children of entitled parents are embarrassed and wish they weren't making a scene. Other times, the entitlement is rubbed off onto them, and they act like spoilt brats when they don't get their own way. One example was a post from 5 years ago titled, Entitled Mother Joins Our Skype Call After We Kill Her Son Repeatedly in Minecraft. It read, I was playing on a Minecraft server with 5 friends at the time this happened, and this new kid joined our game and our Skype call. He kept breaking our builds and demanding we give him stuff. We originally decided to ban him, but we wanted to have some fun, so we kept killing him. The Skype call was basically 6 guys laughing and a little guy screaming, calling us hackers. We were talking on Skype when Entitled Mother called. Let my son play on the server, you ungrateful dicks. No, we all said at the same time. My husband is a lawyer and he will sue you, and I will call the police for harassment. Shut up, lady. Don't you talk to me like that. My son deserves all your items more than all of you combined. F off, woman. You are not allowed to f***ing swear. Only adults are allowed to use that kind of language. One of us makes a Christian Minecraft server meme and she gets really pissed. How dare you insult my religion? You are all going to hell. Alright, where do you live? We start making up addresses like 69 Weed Street and 420 F***off Avenue. That's it, I'm leaving. About time. She left and blocked us. Me and my friends still joke about that incident. I don't know if this woman doesn't understand Minecraft, doesn't understand the law, or both. Imagine threatening to sue a bunch of presumably teenagers for simply playing a game that her spoilt son clearly wasn't skilled at. The fact she expected them to give her their addresses is also ridiculous, and it was her son that was causing problems in the first place. Sounds like OP and his friends wouldn't have minded if he wasn't making a nuisance of himself, but somehow they got accused of harassment just because they taught him a lesson. Here's another post. Backstory: I work at an alcoholic bar that essentially turns into a club at night. This man just came in with his toddlerish kid, ordered a shitload of beers, and essentially let the toddler run around my bar to do whatever it wants. It made its way behind the bar while I was attempting to piss on my break and hit its head on something. Imagine my surprise when I exit the bathroom and immediately get yelled at by this guy about how the child's misadventurous accident was my fault. The exact quote is, "This place is not fit for a child. There's too much alcohol and wires behind the bar." Maybe because I run a bar and not a daycare. Essentially, I hate kids and incompetent, entitled parents. Edit: this is once again an opportunity to tell Americans that cultures other than their own exist. Southern European bars are often frequented by adults with their kids, and it's considered normal here. However, I do wish they'd look after their rats and not blame me for their misconduct. While OP is perhaps slightly harsh in their wording regarding the child, it was the father's fault after all. You can't really blame bored children for entertaining themselves. OP is well within their rights to be annoyed at the situation. In England, it's certainly not uncommon to see kids in pubs through the day. There are normally rules requiring them to be out by around 9 PM. There are no laws preventing them from being in bars during the day, but they're not really seen as family settings, so it's rare you see children in bars at any time. Same goes for Southern Europe in my experience. Obviously I don't live there, but I have visited quite a few countries in that region, and I'm struggling to remember a single time I ever saw a child in a bar. Either way, it's not illegal, and who am I to tell people what to do, but I don't really think bars are the right environment for kids. Adults go there to drink and socialise. There is nothing to entertain kids there. At least with family pubs, there are often play areas, or at least crayons to occupy children, and families typically go for a meal, then maybe a few drinks. When I've seen people make a similar point that bars are not for children, they're met with parents complaining that they shouldn't have to miss out because they have kids, which is quite a weak point in my opinion. Go to a family pub, hire a babysitter. Don't drag your child to a more mature environment where they're going to be bored out of their minds just so you can have a few drinks. Furthermore, there are very few places where adults can go during the day that children can't, and whether you like it or not everyone likes being around kids, should they have to miss out. I like kids, but there are still some occasions where I'd like to enjoy a quiet glass of wine in the afternoon without hearing babies crying and toddlers screaming and running under the tables. The mere suggestion of child-free areas is enough to generate significant backlash in some cases. There was another post on the subreddit about a cafe in the Netherlands that planned to ban children, though they went back on the decision after countless complaints from parents. On the post, there were even comments from parents supporting the idea, despite having children themselves, stating that it's understandable that child-free individuals would want somewhere to enjoy a coffee in peace, and they themselves would visit it, yet somehow the loud minority won this war. As for the bar post, it's certainly not funny that the toddler banged their head. Hopefully it wasn't a serious injury, but it was entirely the father's fault, and it's amusing, if slightly infuriating, that he tried to blame OP and complain that a bar, a place adults go primarily to drink alcohol, where he himself was drinking alcohol, is not child-friendly. Another post in this category from 3 years ago was titled, "My parents cut my beard while I was sleeping," and read, "My parents had a strict clean shave policy when I was growing up, but now I'm an adult and now live on my own. I'd grown a kind of long French beard during the COVID lockdown and was visiting my family once the travel restrictions were relaxed. My parents are hardcore Islamophobes, and they were horrified seeing my Muslim beard, and they asked me to shave it because people might think I have converted to Islam and it's going to tarnish my family's reputation. I basically told them to f*** off and mind about their pubes rather than my beard. Today I was sleeping on the couch and my mum cut my beard off and now it's an ugly mess and I have no option but to shave it off. And I can't leave this place as I'm under 14-day home quarantine as I've travelled from another state and I feel they've won for now. Compared to some of the posts we'll cover later in this video, the result of this entitled behaviour is relatively minor, but I'd still be absolutely fuming if someone shaved my hair off while I was asleep. The reason his mum did that is really bad though. Of course Islamophobia to any extent isn't good, but to go to the lengths of shaving your son's beard while he's asleep because you think he looks like a Muslim is just unhinged. There were some rather amusing replies in the comments though. One user suggested OP leave his beard in the half-shaven mess his mum had made it, another suggested shaving everywhere, head, eyebrows, arms, chest, legs, and throughout the rest of the visit continue to mention how he's the only clean-shaven person in the house. Now let's get on to the bad posts. The first one is a bit long, so I'll just summarise. OP was undergoing chemotherapy after being diagnosed with cancer of the nasal cavity. He got on the bus home from the hospital, which was packed, with no free seats, so he asked a middle-aged man if he could take their seat. A few stops later, a woman, the entitled mother, and her son got on the bus. She asked OP if her child could take his seat, and as he began to politely explain that he was on the way back from the hospital, she interrupted to tell him that they were too, as her son had a broken leg, which obviously wasn't true, as the stop they got on at was a few miles from the hospital, and her son was standing next to her with no visible injuries. OP continued to explain he just finished a chemo session and moved his wig to show her his bald head, at which point entitled mother, or EM, erupted and started screaming in his face, telling him to stop making excuses and get off the seat, also calling him a skinhead piece of shit, before grabbing him and trying to yank him off the seat. A man in his 60s, the hero of the story, stood up for OP and ended up getting punched in the face by EM. Little did she know he was actually a police officer, which of course resulted in her being arrested. She tried to escape but was blocked by other passengers, and a few stops later there was a police car waiting for her. OP, rightfully so, decided to press charges and she got some jail time and community service. Throughout the whole ordeal, EM's son stood there looking mortified and apologised to OP for his mother's behaviour before she was taken away by the police. As if it wasn't already bad enough that EM was so rude and demanding to OP, accusing him of lying about having cancer, it's absolutely shocking that she ended up punching someone who tried to defend him. I feel so bad for the son though. Seems like he was a good kid, and it's awful that he has to put up with his mum's behaviour and her even going to prison for assault. I would say I hope she learned her lesson, but people like that usually don't learn. I bet to this day she still believes her actions were justified and that OP was in the wrong. Another, less physically violent, though no less ridiculous, mother was described in a post on the subreddit 5 years ago. It read, "I'm allergic to fish/seafood. It's not the anaphylactic type of allergy, thank goodness, so I'm not going to die if I eat some, but I do throw up, have a stomachache, and have a massive headache for a few hours. Enough fish or seafood and I break out in small red hives over my arms." My mother didn't believe it, and as a child I couldn't stand up to her properly. She'd force me to eat stuff with seafood or fish in it to prove I wasn't allergic, then ignore me as I was sick. One day she held a dinner party. I was dressed up beautifully and trotted out to parade before the guests. At the time, I was around about 9, precocious for my age and absolutely fed up with my mother making me sick. When she held out a fish cutlet, fish cooked with vegetables rolled into a ball covered in batter and fried, for me to eat, I saw my chance. Me, loudly, "I can't eat that, I'm allergic to fish." Mother, "No you're not, eat it." Me, "I am allergic, I'll throw up." No Asian mother will back down in front of guests for fear of looking like she can't discipline her child. My mother grabbed the fish cutlet, shoved it into my mouth, and said in her most firm voice of command, "Eat." So I ate it. Cut to about 10 minutes later, I go up to my mother and tug on her sari to get her attention. Me, I don't feel well. I vomited on her, on the expensive carpet, and in full view of all the guests. My mother has a reputation for being a kind, generous, charitable, and very religious woman, so in front of all the guests, she couldn't do anything except act sympathetic and send me off to bed to recover. She never made me eat fish or seafood again. I really don't understand how there are people out there who just blatantly deny that allergies exist. Thankfully, this story isn't as bad as the grandma who tried to prove her granddaughter wasn't allergic to coconuts by covering her hair in coconut oil, resulting in her tragic death. But how heartless can you be to know your child throws up after eating a certain food and still force them to eat it? Even if you don't believe they're allergic, I don't think it's right to force them to eat anything. Sure, kids can be fussy, and you might have to strongly encourage them, particularly if they don't like eating anything that isn't burgers and chips. But making them eat specific foods they particularly don't like is not a good idea. It could even lead to EDs in some cases. As for OP, at least she taught her mum a lesson and never had to eat fish again. I really hope this was the only way that she was mistreated by her mum, but it's worrying that she had a reputation for being kind, yet didn't care at all about making her child suffer for the sake of eating one specific type of food. It seems really heartless, especially OP saying her mum would ignore her when she was sick. So it sounds like she was just a nice person for the show, and deep down really not that nice. The next post we'll cover was shared by a user who described herself as a half-black woman who grew up in a ghetto and worked damn hard through high school to earn a scholarship and full ride through college. She states she now works a decent job, makes a reasonable amount of money which she isn't afraid to show off, though still maintains her ghetto heritage. To summarise, it was OP's day off, so she was in a coffee shop, dressed in a hoodie and sweatpants, replying to some emails on her new Samsung Note 10. Entitled mother, EM, and her entitled kid, EK, walk in, EM trying to look wealthy despite wearing nothing valuable. EK, around 12 or 13, screeching and displaying mannerisms that led OP to believe they may have been autistic. EM approaches OP and accuses her of stealing the phone she was using because, quote, people like you can't afford phones like that. She proceeds to say that she should report OP to the police, but she'll let it go if OP gives her son the phone. A manager approaches and tries to calm the situation down, at which point EM claims OP has stolen her son's phone and demands a refund, the phone back, and compensation. The manager instantly takes EM's side, telling OP to give EM the phone or they're calling the police, saying, quote, that's clearly not your phone, when OP again states the phone belongs to her. As EK is screaming in the background, OP understandably gets heated and starts shouting at all three of them until the manager calls the police. The police show up, apprehend OP and take her phone before taking statements. EM, EK, and the manager exaggerate the events that had occurred, and OP refused to cooperate further until the police had checked the CCTV. After the manager initially refused to let the police check the footage because clearly OP was a thief, they finally agreed, and of course, the officers realised OP had done nothing wrong. They awkwardly apologised and said, we weren't working on racial stereotypes, just responding to the scene that was reported. None of the coffee shop staff apologised and EM didn't back down, claiming that OP must have stolen the phone from somewhere else because her type can't afford those phones. There were quite a few comments on the post doubting whether this actually happened, and who knows, but I don't think the situation itself is that implausible. Racist people exist and entitled people exist. Combine the two and you can end up with a crazy psycho who will do unfathomable things to ruin someone else and get their own way. Whether or not this exact situation actually happened, or it's a fabricated story for Reddit points, things like this do happen. The most infuriating part of the story is that EM and the manager seemingly face no consequences for their actions. It was obviously a case of racial profiling, and they falsely accused OP, and even went as far as to falsely report her to the police. That shouldn't be let slide. I really hope OP took some kind of legal action against them, if that was possible, but I also couldn't blame her if she couldn't be bothered with the hassle and just wanted to try and put it behind her. So far, we've covered some quite shocking posts, but unfortunately it gets worse. So much worse. I was initially just going to split this video into two sections, the kinda funny yet mildly infuriating posts, and then the bad ones that we already discussed, naively thinking that must be about the peak of entitlement. How wrong I was. The first one that kinda shocked me was from 5 years ago and described a situation where OP had been called by her auntie, asking if she'd like to bring her 1-year-old son for a photo shoot with 2 of her cousin's sons who were similar ages. One of the cousins was this auntie's son, the other isn't really relevant in the story. All 3 babies were around 3 months apart, so the auntie thought it would be a nice family event. Sounds sweet, right? Yeah, if OP's cousin hadn't SA'd her for 6 years and his own brother and sister for 8 years. By the time of the call, years had passed. The cousin had been caught red-handed with his siblings when he was a teenager, had supposedly been rehabilitated, then got married and had his son. OP, trying to avoid any potential conflict by mentioning the elephant in the room, tried to make an excuse about being broke and unable to visit their city anytime soon, with it being 6 hours away. Totally understandable that she wouldn't want to bring it up herself, but how oblivious can her auntie be? Of course OP isn't going to want to do a photo shoot with the son of the person who SA'd her for years. Why would she want to take any risk of bumping into him again? Still, at this point, I gave her the benefit of the doubt in my mind and wondered if perhaps the auntie didn't actually have any contact with her son and just his baby. Unfortunately, this wasn't the case. After OP's excuse, the auntie pressed on and insisted on coming to visit OP, even saying they'd just camp out in the living room, when OP said they only have a 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate living in the other room. In case you were wondering, yes, when the auntie said we, she was including the cousin. OP said that the cousin would not be allowed around her son, so it would just have to be his wife and the auntie, at which point the auntie blew up. What do you mean cousin isn't allowed around your son? We're family. OP firmly told her that the cousin will never be within 30 miles of her son after he SA'd her and his siblings, and the auntie really had the audacity to reply with, "But he hasn't done any of that stuff in years. Can't we all just forget about that? It happened so long ago." He had been caught around 6 years prior, so it really wasn't that long ago. Not that OP should be expected to just forget it anyway, no matter how much time had passed. A few more heated words were shared between them before the auntie hung up, and OP thought she had heard the end of it until the next day, when she received a call from the cousin's wife who she'd met once. The wife acted as if she was totally oblivious to the call that had occurred the day prior and just casually mentioned the photo shoot, asking if OP's son could come along. OP said that they were broke and didn't want to travel with an infant, and that she didn't want to tear the wife away from her husband, so the wife suggested he went with them. OP said, "Not if you want me or my son there," and the wife replied with, "Why are you doing this? We're trying to do something nice for you and you're making it impossible. Besides, cousin is with me now and we have a son. He's better now." OP was not having any of it, and before hanging up said, "Look, your husband SA'd me for 6 years. He is a child molester and he will never be allowed around my son. If you want to risk your child, that's your business." She was way more polite with both the auntie and the cousin's wife than they deserved. I can't even imagine forgiving someone who did something so abhorrent, never mind expecting one of his victims to just forget all about it and play happy families like nothing happened. It may be the auntie's son, but he SA'd 2 of her other children. For all I know, they've forgiven him as well, but it's baffling that the auntie is defending him so much. And lo and behold, 9 months after this situation, the cousin was caught inappropriately messaging a 15-year-old. So at the time this was posted, he was in prison, his wife had not divorced him, and even still took their son to visit him. I wouldn't be surprised if the auntie still hasn't cut ties with him either. As if OP's reasons weren't valid enough already, this incident clearly showed that she did the right thing not giving him another chance. Not that he would deserve one anyway after what he did to her. I'd heard of the Entitled Parents subreddit before, seen the occasional post while browsing Reddit, but the first time I actually dived into it was when I started researching for this video, so I don't know what the absolute worst post is on there, but I'd be willing to bet the final story we'll cover comes very close. It's titled, "My own mother tried to kill me because I didn't give her money for her birthday." It read, "When I was first married, money wasn't that easy to come by. I had a form of leukemia that took up most of our money. Due to this, we can't just spend money like we wanted to. God bless my husband for being such a sweetheart. We were only early 20s and he still pushed through this for us. December 23rd is my mother's birthday. She is an awful person. She tried to get me pregnant at 14 because she wanted more money from the state. That's an entirely different story I'll post on here if people ask. As this was 20 years ago, we didn't really have the same type of cell phones we have today, so I didn't know until I got home from treatment that my mum had called me multiple times. 3 minutes later, I counted, she shows up at the door. She asks for her money. Both of us were confused, of course. She wants her birthday money, which I've never given to her before. She wanted $608, that exact amount. When I told her no, we can't afford that, she lost it, screaming at me, calling me a whore and an entitled bitch. She gave birth to me, so I should do what she says. And then I say I'm an adult and I don't have to listen. I was angry and tired and I just threw up a few minutes ago. This set her off. She grabbed a kitchen knife and ran at me while my husband is trying to hold her back. She stabbed me right between 2 ribs but didn't pierce any organ, thank God. I don't know what happened in my husband's mind, but he snapped. He broke her arm backwards in rage while screaming something I don't even think was a human language. He called the police and she was arrested while I was taken to hospital. Even more bills to pay, but surprisingly that was taken care of by a domestic violence victims foundation. She got 7 years in prison. I moved out and moved to Louisiana. This morning, I got a call from my sister that she passed away last night. How she did, I don't know. Don't care. She took her entitlement and almost killed her own daughter because of it. As I said earlier, I don't have kids, but I'd have sympathy even for a stranger who had leukemia. Most decent people would. Yet this horrible woman doesn't even have sympathy for her own daughter. Obviously she's entitled and selfish for demanding money from OP right when she got back from the hospital, and I don't even have the words to describe how insane she is for literally stabbing her when she realised she wasn't getting any. No one can blame OP for not caring when her mother died. That woman may have given birth to her, but she clearly wasn't a parent. OP mentioned in that post that her mother had tried to get her pregnant at 14. She actually told that story in a separate post that has since been deleted, but I managed to find an archive, so here it is. Someone asked for the other story. When I was 14, my mum wanted more benefits money from the state. I came home from school and there's a man, mid-20s, sitting there. My mum tells me to sit down, so I do. She says that she wants a grandbaby now, so she can get more smokes, her words. She pointed at the man beside her, who is now looking terrified. He didn't know I was 14, nor that he was here to practically get me pregnant for food stamps. I don't want to piss her off, so I say, "No ma'am, this is really dumb." She, in her infinite wisdom, hated this. She hated me talking back. She goes off the offensive, screaming how she created me and I'm a child, I will do what she says. The poor guy is terrified even more now as he's in a strange woman's house. He's the son of one of her friends, doesn't know her directly. She's screaming and there's a 14-year-old girl talking back. I rarely scream, I'm a quiet person. He runs and calls the police on my neighbour's phone. 15 minutes later they get there and try to calm her down. This does not work, at all. She screams at them that she's my mother and they cannot tell her how to be a parent. She slaps the cop, hard. She goes down to the floor quick. Long story short, after that is I go to live with my dad until I turn 18 and get married. She gets off on some plea deal and gets 2 years and a bunch of community service. The court tried to get me to return to her at 17, which instead of that, I got emancipated. I was working at that point and engaged. I only saw her a handful of times after this instance, thank the good Lord. This is an extreme example of someone who only has children for their own benefit. No mother who genuinely cared about their child would even think of trying to exploit them in such an abhorrent way. It's absolutely shocking. God knows how the mother even got her friend's son there in the first place, let alone how she planned to get him to impregnate her 14-year-old daughter. It's hard to even comprehend the level of trauma that OP must have suffered from this, and presumably many other horrible situations she was put in by one of the people who was supposed to love and care for her. She did mention in a comment on an unrelated post that her mother also tried to get her to sign a will when she had leukemia to say that her daughter would go to her mother and not her husband if she died. Thank God that never happened. I dread to think what her daughter would have had to endure if it did. While most of the posts on the subreddit are nowhere near as serious as this, many of them do highlight the amount of people in general who only have kids for their own benefit. And I think because having kids is the done thing, most aren't even that self-aware. So many have children so they have someone who will eventually help out around the house, maybe even raise their siblings and take care of them when they're older. I might be in the minority when I say I think they're really bad and selfish reasons to have kids. In my opinion, you start a family because you want the experience of raising a child. It's certainly not for their benefit. No one asks to be born. You don't know how their life is going to go, and if by the end of it, it will have been positive or negative overall. Even people who have relatively good lives don't reach their deathbed having never suffered, and if you were never born, you wouldn't have missed out on anything because you never would have even existed. So to me it makes no sense hearing a parent say they gave their child the gift of life. It's not a gift unless you can be sure in advance that it's going to have a net positive effect. And when they talk about how they fed their child, clothed them, look after them, yeah, that's exactly what you're supposed to do as a parent. You don't get brownie points for taking responsibility for the result of your own decisions. If you're not prepared to take care of your child selflessly and unconditionally, don't have children. As someone who loves their parents, that's not me saying that I don't and wouldn't help them out if they needed it. They did and still do go above and beyond to help me, so off my own back I'd be happy to do things for them too, but they don't make me feel obligated to dedicate my life as an adult to repaying the debt of being born that I never signed up for, and I think all parents should be like that. It's one thing being a good parent and acting like your children owe you something, but it's another being a bad parent, like the mother in the last post, and still trying to make your kids feel indebted to you. Of course, this is only one part of the entitlement that you see on the subreddit. Another is parents feeling like they're owed something from everyone else simply for being a parent, as with a couple of the earlier examples in the video. And there are countless more examples of general entitlement from people who just happen to be parents. If I didn't already think this before, after reading some of the baffling stories on this subreddit, I'm convinced a sense of entitlement is probably one of the worst traits a person can have. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts in the comments, plus any suggestions you might have for a future episode. If you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing. Huge thank you to my Ko-fi members and channel members whose names are on screen now. I really appreciate your support. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next week in a new video.